The world of college sports is once again changing before our very eyes, but I think it's moving in a direction that will help TCU.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. We're brought to you today by FanDuel. I've been covering TCU athletics for the past 12 years. I'll tell you more about FanDuel later on in the show, but we'll jump right into it. We're talking about how, once again, the world of college sports, the landscape of college sports, it's changing in a drastic way. But I think the new revenue sharing model that we're moving towards is going to be beneficial for TCU. What am I talking about? Well, late Friday night, Judge Claudia Wilkin in California, she issued a judgment and basically had a ruling on what they call the House settlement, which is 3 antitrust cases that were levied by former athletes against the NCAA. And there's a lot of moving parts to this. There's back pay to former athletes. But what I want to start with is the new revenue sharing model and how I believe it's going to be beneficial for TCU athletics. So we've been working under the world of name, image, and likeness for the past few years. Now, in theory, NIL was supposed to be local businesses having relationships with athletes, having them endorse their services, endorse their products. In exchange, the athletes get paid, or they can work at a camp, right? Or some sort of instructional thing, get some money that way. It was opportunities for college athletes to make money off their name for the first time. What it turned into, because there was very little regulation, was basically pay for play. Collectives and the Flying Sea Club at TCU has done a really great job retaining players, landing players, but through those collectives, through individual donors, it was essentially, instead of like endorsement deals, it was more like, we'll give you this much money. Yeah, there's some endorsement deals in there, but really it's just rich people paying for you to play on the team. And that's happening all across the country. And people at TCU, whether it was, individuals that are making small donations or big ones, they contributed to the talent that TCU has had through their buildings through the last few years. This revenue sharing model that we're now moving towards, effective July 1st, will put a cap on how much schools can spend, but it will also enable schools to pay athletes directly. So TCU, starting this summer, can and will pay student athletes directly instead of going through a third-party service, a third-party collective. The salary cap that's projected for this upcoming year from July 2025 through June 2026 is $20.5 million. TCU has already come out and said that they are ready and prepared to contribute in the revenue sharing model at the allowable amount. So they're going to be at the maximum level of the revenue sharing model, meaning whatever that cap is, if it ends up settling at 20.5, they're prepared to spend $20.5 million on their rosters. Now that's across all sports. That's not just football. That's not just men's basketball. That's all sports. So why is that good for TCU? Well, here's my theory. And I will preface this by saying everyone is working on opinions and theories right now, because we don't know what this is going to look like in practice until the summer starts. And really later on down the line, we'll get a better picture of what it's going to end up looking like. But TCU, at times, now they've done a good job. I think I've told you this before. They've made their focus and the priority spending money on retaining players, right? That's been their main thing. They haven't, in most cases, gone out and spent huge amounts on high school players. They've done some of that in the transfer portal, but their main focus has been the talent that we have on campus. How do we get it to stay, right? So because of that, I believe there have been times where they've had good relationships with recruits. They've had good relationships with players in the transfer portal. And late in the process, or in the middle of the process, whatever the timing might be, somebody swoops in and just throws a crazy amount out there to land a player. I've been on this podcast over the last few years talking endlessly about how I would love for TCU to have better play in the trenches, more bodies in the trenches, more depth there on the offensive and the defensive line. We saw a running game on the football team that really struggled last year. I've had conversations with parents of offensive and defensive linemen. I've had conversations with people in the industry. They're a hot commodity in the transfer portal. It's really difficult to get their services because people are throwing out crazy amounts of money because everybody needs big O linemen, big D linemen that can play, right? With this new model, TCU should be better equipped because it does level the playing field to a certain extent. They should be better equipped to at least have the same chance that other schools do to land some of the top tier talent. Now, it kind of gets back to relationship building and some of those other old school recruiting practices. Money's still going to be a factor. I'm not naive, but Sonny Dykes, the thing that brought him to TCU, I really believe this, when Jeremiah Donati hired him, and of course now Jeremiah has moved on to South Carolina, but when he hired Sonny and they landed on him, and I honestly don't think there was much of a search. I feel like that was their guy almost from the moment that they parted ways with Gary Patterson. The big pull, in my mind, speculating on their thinking, was this is a guy that can recruit. He had done a really good job in the early days of the transfer portal at SMU. He had done a good job in the high school ranks there. Well, when he got to TCU, suddenly everything changed, right? It changed shortly before he got there, but it was really, coming into that new world as he was ushered into leadership here. So a lot of the former practices when it came to recruiting, and yes, I know, I've read books, I've seen the documentaries, I've been a college football fan for a long time. I understand guys were still getting paid before the NIL era. But a lot of those kind of old school, like you build a relationship with a kid over 2 or 3 years, you get to know their family, you're able to land them even despite, some of the pressure from the outside because of that relationship. Some of that got thrown out the window because you started having to negotiate with agents. And a lot of it just came down to, okay, I want to go meet with your collective and sit down and hash out a deal. And if your deal doesn't make sense for me, then I'll be moving on somewhere else. Now, I do want to stress something. NIL will still exist. Name, image, and likeness will still be a thing. But in this house settlement, there's a new system for that as well. NIL will go through a clearinghouse called NIL Go. The NIL Go clearinghouse will evaluate all NIL deals that are of at least $600 in value. And they will have an algorithm, a system, where they'll look at the player and their production. They'll look at the business. They'll look at the deal. And they will set a compensation range for third-party deals. So if TCU makes a deal with a player that's over $600, which most NIL deals are, they will have to report that to NIL Go. There'll be a process where they'll take a look at the algorithm, they'll spit out a number, and they'll let TCU know this is the range that you should be thinking about, talking about when it comes to compensation. So it's not just going to be setting your own price like it has been in the past. And they're expected to approve or disapprove these deals in as little as 1 day. So it's going to be a quick process. Now, there's a lot of ifs in that scenario, right? First of all, you are betting on and you're banking on schools reporting these deals, which we'll kind of have to see how that goes. And there's a new enforcement entity along with this that I'll get to in segment 2. But schools are going to have to self-report. We don't really know what the algorithm is going to look like, right? But again, in theory, this should put somewhat of a cap on, oh, you want that offensive lineman? Let's go get him, and we'll pay him a 6-figure deal, 7-figure deal, just because we can, and we'll iron out the details with NIL. We'll put a bow on it and put up whatever language we need to make it look good and make it look upstanding. But it's essentially just someone or a couple people giving money directly to this player. That's supposed to be curtailed with this system. So I think that's going to help TCU, because TCU has a lot to offer in the recruiting world. But I feel like they've been a little bit hamstrung over the past few years by just the simple fact of like somebody else has had more money to spend. I want to continue this conversation next. We'll get into some more changes and what it can mean for the Frogs. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. FanDuel, it's where the game starts. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. I'm recording this after game 1 of the NBA Finals. Game 2 will be later on tonight. I'm recording this on Sunday afternoon. But, man, how about Tyrese Halliburton and the Indiana Pacers? You think they're dead. They just keep coming back. Another crazy comeback against the Thunder. If you have thoughts about that game, you want to make some live bets, do some parlays, you can become a new customer today at FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. Get up to $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet hits. Again, you make a $5 bet, that first bet hits, you get $200 in bonus bets. TCU, over under 6.5. They want you to take their money. It's going to be over, guys. TCU, North Carolina. North Carolina, 1.5-point favorites. I like the Frogs to cover. I like the Frogs to win. Get involved in the action. FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. FanDuel, official betting partner of the NBA and also a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. So there's different thoughts about this. I actually saw Chris Vanini from The Athletic. He had a take on Twitter or X earlier this week where he discussed the changing world of NIL and revenue sharing and where it's going. And he actually thought that this new system is going to be more beneficial for the Blue Bloods. And his theory was, you look at Texas Tech, for example, what they've done in softball, making the College World Series final. You look at what they're doing in football this offseason. NIL, with the ability to name your own price and create your own deals, it allowed Texas Tech to go above and beyond market value and pay players a crazy amount to come play for them. And while if things were equal and a kid's choosing between Alabama and Texas Tech or School X, in most cases they would go with the more traditional blue blood program. Suddenly Tech had a foothold because they could compete monetarily, right? But I really think TCU has so much to offer in the Big 12 with location, with the facilities, specifically when it comes to the Big 12. Evening out the money is going to help them a lot because it doesn't give anyone else a specific advantage over them. And then nationally, I think it could be helpful too, because it does come down for, DFW kids. If compensation's fairly equal, TCU can sell that, hey, you get to play at home. They can sell that, hey, we have that, build that relationship with the family, with the athlete, and hope that wins out over the just the compensation itself. Now, you might be wondering, $20.5 million for all sports. How are they going to divvy it up? Well, there's no set way. Every school can decide on their own what to do. Actually, let me read this quote from Mike Buddy real quick since I'm here. This is from Mike Buddy, and it was released on Friday night. The approval of the House settlement represents a landmark moment in collegiate athletics. TCU is committed to maintaining its position in the upper echelon of athletics. As previously communicated, TCU will engage in revenue sharing at the most competitive level, and in doing so, create new opportunities for our student athletes, strengthen our pursuit of championships, and advance the mission of our university. So pretty standard response. They're excited about it. They've been prepared for this for a long time, right? They've been looking towards it, building towards it. They knew this was the future. Now, there was uncertainty on whether or not it was going to get approved or when it was going to get approved and what that would mean for the upcoming season. But they knew this was the way the winds were shifting, and they're ready to rock and roll in this new world. So I feel like having things more equal across the country is going to be really good for TCU and what they have to offer. But going back to how are schools going to split it up? TCU hasn't come out and publicly said anything about that yet. But I read a couple pieces this weekend, and the consensus seemed to be that 90% of the compensation was going to go to football and men's basketball, with 75% of it possibly going to football, 15% to men's basketball, and then you're looking at 5% to women's basketball, 5% to the rest of the sports. Now, TCU is in an intriguing situation because, I mean, across athletics, they've been really competitive in just about every sport, right? We've seen a women's basketball program that's suddenly been resurrected in a huge way by Mark Campbell. So they've got some tradition to maintain there now. They're bringing Olivia Miles this offseason. A lot's happening with that squad. Men's basketball, Jamie Dixon, I know people are frustrated with them, but they've gotten better. They're suddenly like a tournament team most years. Hopefully they get back there this year. So there's some money to spend there. Obviously, football is what's driving the bus for everybody. And that's going to be the institution and the program that's the main amount of these funds. And then for TCU specifically, baseball is a big deal here. Tennis is huge. Men's tennis, right? Women's soccer. There's other sports all across the board. Beach volleyball just won a national title. They're the one sports that won a national title recently. Men's tennis last year, but in this calendar year, I guess I should say. So there's a lot to unpack on how they're going to use it, but the majority of these funds are going to be used for football and for men's basketball. But TCU has to divvy this up shrewdly because there's a lot of sports that are going to need that care as we move forward. Baseball is moving away from 11 scholarships to 34, which is big news for TCU baseball because for years, one of the things that was a big challenge for TCU specifically, it's expensive to go to school at TCU. I'm still paying my student loans back, right? And some of you might be too, but it's a burden financially for a lot of people. And some of the top flight baseball players, if you're not getting a full ride, there's a lot for their families, for themselves to make up out of pocket over those years that they're on campus. So having those full scholarships is going to be really good for Kirk Saarloos and his team. Because again, you're talking about what will hopefully end up being a more even playing field moving forward. The new enforcement arm of the NCAA, who they are, what it means. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day. So another part of the settlement, the NCAA has kind of slowly had their influence and power weakened throughout the years. There will now be an LLC predominantly managed by the power conferences, which will be the SEC, Big 10, Big 12, and ACC. And it's going to be called the College Sports Commission. They will be in charge of investigation and enforcement. They're being hired to investigate and enforce rules related to cap circumvention, tampering, and then levying, stiff penalties. Violators may be subject to multi-game coach suspensions, reductions in a school's rev share pool, as well as reductions in allowed transfers and significant schools' fines. But, and there's another caveat here. So College Sports Commission is now in charge of enforcement. They're supposed to be the ones that investigate if tampering is happening, which we know it is. But how do you prove it? Who's going to be the person that blows the whistle there? When it comes to getting around the cap, the new revenue sharing cap, and other issues that could arise, they're supposed to be the ones that investigate and then levy punishments. And that's a huge part of this. Because as I said earlier, this is really beneficial for TCU if things become more equal and we move away from this model where somebody's just swooping in and resetting the market, right? If that becomes a problem, if we're going back to the days where, we got bagmen like throwing money at guys under the table, then it becomes a trickier balance for everybody because it sort of defeats the purpose of what this settlement goal was, right? Which was to put some parameters in place. I think most of us can agree. I won't say all of us because I don't want to speak for everybody. Most of us can agree that the time had come for college athletes to get paid for their services or to at least make some revenue and make some cash off of what they were doing and all the, revenue they're bringing into the university. And more than just the scholarship itself, which I realize is a big deal, but more than just that. The problem was it all happened at once. And the NCAA lost more and more power to the point there wasn't really a lot of rules and regulations. And so we've seen with the transfer portal, we've seen with NIL, there's been so much chaos with player movement and guys leaving after one semester, leaving after 1 year, getting tampered with while they're on a current roster, by another team. And then as soon as the season's over, leaving. In Nico Maliava's case, threatening a holdout, basically going through with it. Tennessee calling his bluff and him moving on to UCLA a few weeks later. So, in theory, having these rules in front of schools and institutions should be helpful in leveling the playing field and making sure everybody can be competitive in this new world. But again, it comes back to how are they going to investigate? Are they going to be consistent with their punishments? And is it really going to deter those programs from not doing those things again? Right. And then another part of this is, will these things stand up in court? Because the problem that the NCAA increasingly saw over the years was people found out, if I just take these issues to court, these eligibility issues and things like that, they don't really have a leg to stand on. And so athletes kept winning court cases, schools kept winning court cases, and slowly the power of the NCAA just eroded. So is this new house settlement going to stand up? Like, are these individual policies and rules and changes that are being made going to stand up in the future? Well, that's a big question. What happens when somebody signs a revenue share contract with a school and tries to leave? What if they sign a deal, spring camp rolls around, they don't get their starting spot, or not everything is what it's cracked up to be, and they try to bounce? Does the school take them to court? Does the school say, hey, we need our money back, or we're not going to let you out of this deal? There's so many things that are uncertain. And it feels like ultimately we're moving towards a world where collective bargaining is what needs to happen. That's what we have in professional sports. That's why it runs a lot more smoothly. Well, also because you have less teams and less athletes. But you have union representatives, you have the league, they come together, they negotiate. Sometimes you have labor disputes, sometimes you have lockouts. But once those deals are hashed out, everybody understands, okay, we got to work within these parameters and work together to make it happen. College sports is much different. There's a lot more ground to cover, right? So a world where athletes are employees, that's a more complicated situation. But we're getting closer to that now. Now, if you're wondering, no, they're not officially employees. They're going to be independent contractors essentially for these universities. But I think one day we're going to get to a place, and I don't know who all is going to be included. That's really the question for TCU and the Big 12. Is it just going to be like the Big 10 and the SEC, or are they going to invite more people to the party? But we're going to see a world where there's the powers that be and the power conferences, and then the athletes themselves, and how do they come to agreements within college sports that makes sense for everybody. That's going to be the huge challenge for everyone across college football and beyond. This is Locked On Horned Frogs. We'll be back again on Wednesday. Remember, in the month of June, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it's your team every day. Subscribe to the YouTube channel or find us wherever you get your podcast.